What's up, guys? Rick from DFS On Demand here with a preview of the US Open. I am so stoked about this. Pebble Beach, it's going to be a great host. But before we jump into that, we have to look back at this week's RBC Canadian just for a second. I promise. I think there's a few things that we can take out of it and we'll move right along. Now, full disclosure, that tournament just ended, the RBC Canadian. So most of the tools have now been updated on the website. The game logs will be updated tomorrow, but everything else should basically be good right now. We just saw Rory run away with a 7-shot win, which we'll talk about more in a second. But before I do that, I want to pull up the leaderboard from the Canadian Open that just ended here. And like we always do, I'm going to sort by guys that played really well tee to green, but may have faltered on the putting green and see if there's any good targets for us this week. So if you look at this, Rory absolutely destroyed the field tee to green. Destroyed the field off the tee. I mean, basically he was almost leading in every single category. He was 6 shots better tee to green than the next closest guy to him, which was Justin Thomas. Now, this is really interesting. Justin Thomas, the second best tee to green player at the Canadian Open, loses 3.3 strokes on the putting greens. Well, if you think that he might not do that too often, he may be a really good bounce back candidate for this week at the US Open because his game was really sharp otherwise. All right, if we scroll down a little bit more, some of these guys aren't going to be playing, like Taylor Gooch, not in the field for the US Open. Here's a guy that you might want to fade. So Shane Lowry actually gained more strokes putting, 7.6, than he did tee to green, 6.4. So when one of your the vast majority of your strokes gained is coming from one category, that's also a little bit concerning. But also then throw in the fact that it's via putting, which is the most volatile stat. I mean, if you look at it, he was basically neutral off the tee, gained 2 on approaches, then he gained 4 around the greens and 7.5 putting. That is probably not a performance that we would expect to happen again. So I can't imagine I'm going to be getting too much of Shane Lowry, even with his high finish this week. And then finally, the other guy that I think is probably worth pointing out here, well, I guess 2 guys, Webb Simpson and Brandt Snedeker, who I think both will be fairly popular for the US Open, gained a ton of strokes on the greens. Webb 9 strokes, Brandt 7.2. I guess if we were to say one of them is an illusion, it's probably Webb Simpson. We've seen Snedeker's putter. I mean, he's a great putter in general, but we've seen him get just scorching hot at times, and a lot of that came from his 60 that he shot in the second round. So that kind of adds up. Webb's consistent playing over his head on the greens is a little bit concerning, but we'll talk more about those guys. So let's fast forward now. It is US Open week. What can we expect from Pebble Beach? I keep wanting to say Bethpage Black. If I say Bethpage during this, know that I'm talking about Pebble Beach. Well, it's interesting because we've already seen a tournament played here this year, right? We've had the AT&T, the Pro-Am, and then we've now are getting a presumably converted version of this where it's going to play a little bit longer, but the way that Pebble is set up, there's not much longer it can get, right? They can extend like 1 or 2 holes, but this is going to be a shorter US Open, and Pebble has a lot of these like designed landing areas, right? You cannot just bomb and gouge. And then what we're going to find, and there is literally a quote out there that is describing the fairways at Pebble Beach as strips of bacon. Yeah, they're going to be super thin. The rough is going to be super thick. And then you're going to look at it and say, oh, well, these are already like the smallest greens on the PGA Tour. So it's going to take a complete game to win here. Guys that we're looking for, presumably total driving, guys that drive it far, drive it accurately, second shot players, of course, because the greens are going to be super small. So strokes gained approach might come into play. But I think you can look at this from a few angles. Guys that normally play well at the US Open, they're certainly in play. So you have like tournament history because of what we expect the conditions to be, what we expect the winning score to be. The style of US Opens is generally the same. And then you also have guys that have played well at the Pro-Am, right? I mean, hey, they've seen this course. They might have played well this year or in past years. There might be good vibes at Pebble Beach. So there are a few different trends that you can look for as you're trying to assess who you should be starting or sitting this week. So let's fast forward to the cheat sheet and see if we can find some of these guys that are most interesting. Now, the 6 guys at the top of the leaderboard, or at the top of the salary pool here. And what's interesting is most weeks not most weeks do we fade the guys at the top, but sometimes we find it difficult to make lineups with them. Well, it's major pricing, so we know it's going to be a little bit softer. We know that you're going to basically be able to play whoever you want. So if there is someone up here in the 10,000 plus range, go get them, baby. Like, this is now the time. So obviously they're over $10,000. They're all really good plays. I will kind of break them down like this. Rory, Brooks, DJ, to me, those guys are in their own tier. I think you're kind of splitting hairs between them. I'm more than happy to roster Rory. I'm not going to abide by like, oh my gosh, he won last week, there's no way he's going to win this week. I think that's garbage. I think it's difficult to win on the PGA Tour any week, which is why you don't see guys go back-to-back as often, but there's nothing that's stopping him. The key here is this number, 1.15, which is the average strokes gained off the tee for Rory, and it is best in this field. Actually, I believe it's best in this field. Let's just sort. Let me just make sure I don't have any small sample size guys. Yeah, okay. EVR has a small sample size, but he still comes in second. So Rory, the best in the field off the tee by a pretty significant margin. And he doesn't really hurt you in any of the other categories, right? He's plus around the greens. He's plus putting. He's been really great on approaches. Guys that are probably going to be devastated by that thick rough and those bacon slice fairways would, in theory, be Tiger and Jordan Spieth, the guys that are a little less accurate off the tee, and they're going to have to make it up in other places. So they're kind of in the second tier for me. Believe it or not, Cantlay, it continues to be interesting. I always wonder, you know, like he's now $10,000, so he gets a big price increase from his win at the Memorial, and you have a lot of people coming in who want to roster the big cool names. They want to roster Tiger and Rory and DJ, and even below Cantlay is like Fowler and JT. Like there's other names there. I'm wondering if he just goes overlooked at $10,000. So as the week progresses, I mean, really, really good skill set from Patrick Cantlay that we think can translate to almost any course. I want to see what the rest of the industry moves on him and make a decision after that. Now, I'll move quickly through the cheat sheet here because I think some of the other tools are going to offer some additional help here. But that, I mentioned it before, that Justin Thomas tournament that he put together at the Canadian Open, where he was immaculate tee to green, is really interesting. He's $9,300. He's smack in between Ricky Fowler and Jon Rahm. I really think he's a good leverage spot. I could absolutely see him winning the U.S. Open. I mean, he putted probably, I could go look this up, but I'm assuming the strokes that he lost on the green at the Canadian Open was one of the worst performances of his career. And he still finishes T20. That to me is really intriguing. I might have to go back and get him. Once you get sub 9,000, this is where things are going to get really popular. Hideki tee to green, he's only 8,800. You have Matt Kuchar, who, remember, this pricing came out about a week ago, so we did not even have the Canadian Open result. Kuchar's having an excellent year. He goes and pops another top 5 off at the Canadian Open, and now he's sitting here again in a major at $8,500, and we're all thinking, okay, do we just start our lineups plug and play with Matt Kuchar? The answer to that is probably. I mean, if you just look at his win odds and compared to his peers, he's in a really interesting spot. And we'll get to value guys, but real quick, we're gonna have to address Paul Casey, who kind of screwed everybody over at the Charles Schwab with the withdrawal. But as you'll see in a second, when we get to the course key stats, there's going to be a case to make for Paul Casey. And then finally, I'm just going to run through here and see, tournament history-wise, does anybody really pop out? Stenson has 2 top 6 finishes in the last 5 years at the U.S. Open. Who else do we have here? Anybody else really popping off? Here's a couple of top 25s. Brandon Grace seems to show up at this event. 25th, 50th, 5th, and 4th in his last 4 years. Trying to see if there's anybody with really elite stuff. Zach Johnson, 3 straight top 25s, including a top 10. As we continue to go down the list here, starts to get a little bit ugly because then you're going to get into a lot of the qualifiers. So let's go look at some of these other tools, and I'll flip over to the course key stats. And this is really, really cool. So this is that correlation model that we run every single week. I think I'm back to 12 years now or so between DraftKings performance and PGA Tour stats. And the stats are fairly okay, so let's just go through this. So birdie or better and birdie average, no doubt going to correlate to DraftKings scoring. But we also see par 5 birdie or better show up here. So it's rare that on the PGA Tour, when we run this model, that par 5 birdie or better shows up. Probably indicative of how you have to go out and get the par 5s at Pebble Beach to find success. And then we get a couple of a couple of putting stats, putting average and putts per round. So according to the course key stats, we are looking for birdie makers, especially on par 5s, and guys that can putt the ball. So let's start there. Okay, so just sorting this by birdie or better, there's that name again. Justin Thomas leads the way, 27.5% birdie or better, followed up by Gary Woodland, Brooks Koepka, Rory, and Jason Day to round out the top 5. Interesting value names here. Bryson DeChambeau at 8,100, who has obviously played really poorly coming in. It's driving his price down. If you are a believer in his long-term form over his short-term form, you're most certainly going to have to buy back in at some point. It might not be this week, but you are going to have to buy back in on Bryson DeChambeau because of that long-term form that we have seen him put together. And this price is a really, really good value. The other guy value-wise would be Siwoo Kim, 7,100. One of the more volatile players on tour, but I can already see he does a few of the things that we're looking for really well, which is he's $7,100, which is nice. 25% birdie or better, like 7th best in this field. And right here, this putting average, 27 putts per round, which was already a correlated stat. Strokes gained putting is probably a better statistic, but hey, it's always nice to see very few putts, and it's probably helped out by his great around the green game. Now, I imagine if I go to par 5 birdie or better, I might get a lot of the same names here, and I would be somewhat correct, but here are some names that are different. So Justin Thomas still number 1 in par 5 birdie or better. Adam Scott shows up. He's 8,600. He's been playing well recently. Gary Woodland, who I did not mention in the first birdie or better stat here, but Gary Woodland's 8,000. Gary Woodland tends to be popular in these types of majors because, kind of like Kuchar, his price comes down into a very reasonable range. And we have seen Woodland find success at some of these less than driver courses. That's not to say that Pebble this week is definitely going to be less than driver, but it probably is. There's going to be some situations where you're just going to be able to hit 2-iron or 3-iron or whatever it is and hit it into the landing area and then just try to throw a dart for your second shot. So Gary Woodland, very, very intriguing this week. I wish he putted better, but you can even see, and we'll get there in a second, his total driving stats are excellent. DeChambeau 4th, Koepka 5th, and then here's a really interesting name, Martin Kaymer. So Martin Kaymer, who we actually just pop off, 2 weeks ago at the Memorial, and he has one of the lowest birdie or better percentages on tour overall. One of the lowest, 20%. It's brutal. Except his par 5s. His par 5s is like the 6th best in this field. He's stellar. He's better than Kuchar. He's better than Rory, like guys that destroy par 5. So it's really interesting to see that. If par 5 birdie or better is as important as the model believes it is, you certainly have to consider Kaymer at 7,400, especially coming off of his recent good run. All right, total driving. This is actually a stat that I don't normally like. Because what it does is it takes your rank in driving distance, it adds it to your rank in driving accuracy, and it says, hey, you are this person in total driving. It's fine. It's strokes gained off the tee tries to show you how good someone is with the driver specifically. here's total driving. It's just a different way to kind of look at it. But I think it's valuable this week because I prefer you to be long. I prefer you to be accurate. And this shows you kind of the happy medium between them. So here's where Paul Casey shows up. Leads the way. His rank is 70. His score, his total driving score is 71, which is the best in this field. Bryson, number 2. Again, that is aided by a lot of his long-term form, but the fact that this hasn't fallen much in the 4 or 5 weeks that he has now like missed the cut in a row or whatever this brutal run has been is shocking to still see him up there. Again, you get a Gary Woodland, 3rd. Justin Harding, who probably doesn't have as many rounds as the rest of these guys, and we saw him get a little popular at the PGA Championship, I believe. He's in here at 6,900. And then you get Keegan to round out the top 5. Keegan's always going to be a total driving guy because he hits it far, hits it straight, hits a lot of fairways. All right, let's wrap this up by going over to the strokes gain tool because there's a lot to find here. And I've loaded in this. This is up to date post the RBC Canadian. This is live numbers. And we've got all the salaries loaded in there as well. So I just want to sort this field by strokes gained tee to green. And when you're looking between the studs here, so the guys that are $10,000 or more, Cantlay's right on the number. You can see the visual. There is a big range in strokes gained tee to green. Rory leads the way at 2.3, which is his per round average. And Spieth trails, he's the worst one here, losing a quarter stroke per round tee to green. So you can see pretty big discrepancy between these guys. DJ and Cantlay, very much in the same ballpark. Brooks and Tiger, kind of in the same ballpark. Rory, pretty significantly out ahead, and Spieth, pretty significantly behind if you're looking at tee to green numbers. Going further down, the guys that lead their pricing tiers are Thomas, Fleetwood, Hideki, Adam Scott, Paul Casey. Those, how many names did I just rattle off? 5? Those 5 guys are probably going to make a pretty strong core for me. I imagine in some capacity, those guys are going to be involved in a lot of my lineups. Kuchar as well, although very candidly, I have a bet on Kuchar. I got it at 66-1 a few weeks ago, maybe a month or 2 ago, to win the U.S. Open. So I don't necessarily need to be as involved and invested in DFS. But if I wasn't, I think he's a very good play. I think he's going to be very popular, all that stuff. But that's just full transparency. I probably won't be playing him a ton because I have other interests in him. I don't need to, but certainly no problem with it. Okay, then you have Gary Woodland, and then the guys that bring up the bottom of this field would be Keegan, Benyon, and Scotty Scheffler. And real quick, I just want to see approaches. Okay, so with how small these greens are at Pebble, I really do like the strokes gain approach numbers, and a lot of the top guys are pretty even here. There's just a small fraction of a discrepancy between these names. Brooks, DJ, Tiger, Rory, Cantlay, Justin Thomas, Hideki. Those guys are all very much in the same strokes gained approach ballpark. Now, obviously, there's a difference between Hideki being priced at 8,800 and Brooks being priced at 11,600. Big difference there. But all those guys are kind of studs. Then you get some real big studs down here in the bottom right quadrant of this, where Stenson has been the best in approaches for the 2019 season. Keegan's here, Sergio's here, and Jim Furyk is here, this is really interesting. Are people going to roster Sergio? Missed the cut last week, or I should say the RBC Canadian, depending on when you're listening to this. Disappointed a lot of people. Will you go back to him? Even if you rostered Keegan at the RBC Canadian, you feel let down because he was a first-round leader, then faded to what? I don't know what he ended up finishing. 40th, something like that. Just never put another round together. Jim Furyk is so damn interesting at this year's U.S. Open. Clearly has revived his career, right? Having the best season he has had in a long time. And his game is like perfect for a U.S. Open, especially a short U.S. Open. He is not going to compete at 7,600 yards and when he has to hit 5 wood into every green. He's not going to compete there. But he is going to compete when you have to be super accurate and you have to throw darts and it has to be a course that you're familiar at. And Jim Furyk kind of fits all of that, right? It's going to be a lot about bogey avoidance. He doesn't make a lot of birdies, but he doesn't make a lot of bogeys either. You're going to be pretty dependent on his finishing position, but there's something about Furyk that is kind of just drawing me in at 70, what is he, 71, 72? $7,200. There's something drawing me in. This feels like the perfect time to play him, just because of all this great vibes we have going on. All right, my favorite thing in the whole world, this who's not chart. Who's hot, who's not? Is that what I said? Or did I say who's not, who's not? Anyway, looking at this very quickly, because I think we've kind of covered a lot of this. Let's sort by tee to green and just look for the hottest players in the last 30 days. And it's no surprise to see a lot of big names up here. It's Cantlay, it's Adam Scott, it's DJ, Koepka, Rory, Paul Casey. Boom. Just like that. Top guys. But if you look at guys who are much better than their baseline, so their baseline being the 2019 season, the guys that are playing above their head the most, Adam Scott, Shane Lowry, who we talked about, Billy Horschel, Patrick Cantlay again, Brooks Koepka again, and Rory Sabatini at $7,700. Those guys playing over their 2019 baseline pretty significantly. Here's one that I love to look at. Let's flip this and go to putting. And let's find guys that have putted super poorly recently, but are actually much better. So let's look at Sergio at $7,800. Was brutal putting at the PGA Championship, both rounds. Pretty bad at the RBC Canadian and in the first round on Thursday, and then was neutral in the second round. So he's losing 1.75 strokes per round over the last 30 days, but he is a basically dead average putter on the PGA Tour, 0.01. That's literally dead even. So if you can buy that Sergio is going to get back to even his 2019 form, which is neutral, and he's going to play all 4 rounds, you're looking at basically a 7-shot swing compared to what we've seen over the last 30 days. Again, Justin Thomas shows up here. Like, these are names that I'm going to have to probably get into some of my lineups. So that's something I really, really like. And while we're here and while we're wrapping this up, I do want to look up Justin Thomas really quickly and see if I can see what his strokes gained were. Yeah, here we go. So it's obviously a smaller sample because JT missed a lot of the year, but his putting at the RBC Canadian, losing 3.3 on Friday, losing 1 on Saturday, never really gaining anything. Really, really bad. So I don't think that's really indicative of, and I know it's not indicative of his 2019 season. As I just showed you, in 34 rounds, he's basically a neutral putter. So those are the types of things that I'm looking for this week. So we did this last week. I gave you 2 players. We said, are you going to play Piercy or are you going to play Stenson? A lot of you told me Piercy. Stenson was the pick. Let's do it again. If you could only pick one and play one, are you playing Justin Thomas or are you playing Ricky Fowler? They are separated by $200. Fowler obviously going to be usually a more consistent finisher. He's cheaper. JT has a lot more question marks. So who are you going to be rostering this week? If you could only choose between one of them, tweet me. It's at DFS On Demand or leave a comment below. Talk to you guys soon. See ya.